Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because it's hard to talk about Federer without sort of associating him with my friend. When I was in college, he was the first friend I made in Bombay. The ebbs and tides of his career also sort of, which I even wrote in the review, sort of went very well with our friendship. At the end, like in 2022 Laver Cup, we saw it coming. For 1 year, he hadn't played before it. He was injured, and it was always the messaging between us was always that. And my friend already sort of was in recovery from cancer then. And the moment Federer retired, and I tell myself this all the time, that's when he also relapsed, and that's when he passed away. And in as a sports fan, you often create narratives in your head, and
Yeah.
that as long as Federer's career was there, your friend was there, and your friendship was alive. And the moment he left, everything else ended. Very subconsciously, even I based my voice and my personality in my writing on someone like Federer, the way he played tennis.
Every sports fan has a moment they can't quite explain. Not the championship win or the record broken, something smaller. A single shot, a specific afternoon, a feeling that arrived through a television screen and never quite left. The kind of thing that makes you realize that what you thought was just fandom was actually something else entirely. Hi, I'm Shruti Jahagirdar, and this is The Curious Human Project, a podcast about sport, health, habits, and the hustle to stay human. And today we are going deep into one of the most human things there is, what it actually feels like inside the heart and mind of a true sports fan. My guest today is one of India's sharpest film critics. He currently writes for the Hollywood Reporter India. He has also written for the Film Companion, OTTplay and Firstpost. His name is Rahul Desai, and at one point his Twitter bio literally listed being a Federer enthusiast before his film criticism. Because for Rahul, watching Federer play was not a separate world from his own. It was perhaps about what a film critique is always chasing, the gap between what you see and what you feel. The way a body in motion can carry meaning, the way a single shot can hold an entire character inside it. Federer for him was a text worth reading. And in 2017, he sat down to review Christopher Nolan's Dunkirk and opened it with these lines. They had time, but time didn't have them. Every shot felt like a tense assault on a viewer's heart and nerves. It was bloody, yet there was no blood spilled. He was describing a tennis rally, 26 shots, Federer and Nadal, Australian Open final, and it found its way into a film review. Making sense of Nolan's work through a Federer-Nadal lens, I thought was absolutely poetic and perfect. Today we are talking about Federer, about the Big Three era that's quietly closing, about what impact sport can have on a person, and what happens when it ends. Rahul, really glad to have you with me today.
Lovely to be here.
Welcome.
Thank you for having me, and that was a lovely intro. It got me nostalgic about a lot of things, which hopefully we'll talk about. Yeah.
Absolutely. And before we get into sport, I want to start with how do you how did you begin loving writing? Because you have expressed your love for sport through writing. So give me a little bit of your background into love for writing.
I basically, at some point after college, I obviously, like most drifters, I started watching a lot of movies and at the same time watching a lot of sports. Like I was always a sports fan, but when you escape into sports, it becomes a different medium altogether. So, in a couple of years, I realized that I do want to be a writer. I just didn't know what kind. Like at some point, I was flirting with the idea of being like a screenplay writer or an author, or um, journalism wasn't really on my radar. But when it did come on my radar, I knew very clearly that I'd either write about sports or film. It can't be both, at least as a sort of a main gig. And I think film gave me the opportunity to write, be more prolific, and sort of practice my writing better every week. Sports involved a lot of reporting, and I'm not really a people's person. Uh, I don't really surround myself with a lot of people, and sports, at least being a reporter in sports or being a reporter in film for that matter, does require you to meet interesting people and interview them and be curious about them, which unfortunately I was not attuned to do. So I decided to start writing about films because it was just me and a film on screen, and that was it. I didn't need to interact with anyone else. And also, I could write 2 or 3 times every week. So, what started as a side gig quickly became like my passion. And I discovered my love for writing through it also. Along the way, obviously, I always used to say that just a writer who happens to write about film. I started writing about sports on the side once in a while, whichever publication would let me. And yeah, but my first love was always sports. So I'm not going to, yeah,
Wow.
my like film was always there, but I was not as I was not as serious about it as say I was as a sports fan or as someone who was curious about athletes and generally sort of following a sport. So yeah, in a parallel universe, I'm a sports writer, but right now I'm just a film critic.
I did not know that. I knew you loved sport. Of course, that's why we're having this conversation. But I never knew that you considered seriously being a sports journalist and that you began thinking of yourself as a sports fan before anything else happened.
Yeah.
So that's superb. And that brings me to, a very fundamental question before we get into the episode, and which is that can you, from your lens, define what is a sports fan?
Um, from my lens, a sports fan is basically someone who sort of uses sports as a surrogate to live life. Uh, because I think most of us aren't attuned to think of sports as something we can achieve, as professional sport as something we can achieve. So I think uh, for me, it was always a medium to see life through a lens I always dreamt of, which is extremes basically, extreme failure, extreme success, extreme athleticism. Um, it's not just about watching or cheering for them. For me, it's also about living vicariously through them.
Yeah.
And most of us believe while growing up that we could have done this if we had put our mind to it. We could have if our parents were a little more supportive. But I think the great thing about athletes and sportswomen and sportsmen is that uh, I think most of them sort of overcame a lot of conditioning, overcame a lot of these factors that we just feel very comfortable to sit on and became
Yeah.
what they did. And for me, that little story of who they are always transcends what they do in their sport.
Yeah.
And whenever I'm watching something or even rooting for someone, it's always the cumulative. It's the cumulative experience of their lives that always hits me first, uh,
Yeah.
rather than just analyze a shot or analyze like whether they how they won, how they lost. So for me, yeah, being a sports fan is being having the most intense relationship of your life with a stranger.
Yeah, and that's what makes your writing about sports so much more interesting, because of course we have some fantastic sports journalists in India, some of who actually delve into the story of the athlete, connect it to of course the reportage as well. But when someone like you writes about sport, you're writing about how you are growing with that moment, how you are emotionally going through a journey with that moment, and which is why it's going to stay with you. And a major part of your writing then stays with that emotion, and that I think only a sports fan has the freedom to express, rather than only a sports journalist, and which is why there is space for writing about sport in so many various ways. So really fascinating, and I find it really interesting that a sports fan doesn't essentially have to have been a sportsman, at a smaller or a large level. I find it fascinating that a person who's not actually been in a match on the ground or gone through the various emotions of a high stakes match, even at a school level, a final match is high stakes for you at that point of time. And so you're going through the entire journey. And if someone's not gone through it, they can still form a really strong bond with an athlete or with a sport, and and sport is equally generous to them in terms of what they can get through it.
Yeah.
And you have called yourself a retired Federer enthusiast, and I was reading your review of Federer the 12 final days, and you of course mentioned that documentaries are normally made very spicy by the life that the subject has led, somebody like Amy Winehouse or Madonna or someone. And then you went on to say that, but Federer didn't have any of this,
Mm.
and you said that, and this is a documentary, of course, made by Asif Kapadia, and you said that um, almost everything about him, his game, family, support, team, even his relationship with peers and players past, glistens with perfection.
Mm.
But his perfection isn't boring.
Yeah.
It's the kind of perfection rooted in vulnerability and naturalism against all odds.
Yeah.
So I wanted you to kind of delve into that about Federer, and what are your best memories of watching Federer play?
Yeah, so I think my relationship with Federer as a Federer fan started pretty early in college through a friend. And back then, obviously, I was young, so I was just looking for someone to support. It mostly tended to be Americans back then because they were ruling the sport. But then when I saw Federer for the first time in my life, uh, I sort of followed someone because I just enjoyed it. There was a narrative forming in my head because it was more. I just enjoyed watching them play for the sake of playing. It just wasn't about what nationalism they are from or what kind of language they represent or sort of it didn't matter to me the legacy. I just enjoyed watching the fact that here was a player um, who was perceived to be so gifted and talented and sort of God given in so many ways. But I also saw something so fragile about his perfection
Yeah,
because he was coming up in an era where tennis was becoming a little more mechanical and muscular. Of course,
yeah,
Nadal came up after that, then Djokovic. So you saw the narrative changing, but you saw this one great always keeping a certain aesthetic alive, and that's not because he was trying to. It was just who he was. I don't think
yeah,
he made a lot of technical changes to his game over time, but I don't think he changed the way he played. And
yeah,
for me, always being he was an underdog, even though people said he was a favorite entering every tournament, and for many years he was the top dog, which is and it's very hard to empathize with a Federer fan because he used to win so much. But the
yeah,
thing for me is he was always the underdog because of the way he played. It's
yeah,
not easy to sort of present that perfection to a viewer. We think it's perfection, but he's worked very hard to hone it. Present
yeah,
that sort of game to the viewer and say, I'm going to win day in and day out, especially when tennis is evolving in different ways. So for me, I always loved the fact, like, even across sports, I've loved athletes like that. I've loved the
yeah,
Rohit Sharma, who is perceived to be effortless, but he's no, like, there's so much more than that. I used to love Brian Lara back in the day because
yeah,
he was flawed, but he was also so beautiful to watch. So Federer for me was an extension of what I always. For me, it was a personality of sport. It was not something that you get by training day in and day out. It was putting yourself in your game, and I think that's why even that documentary, even though he didn't lead the most eventful life, and he's been a very private person, his game itself contains so many layers and so many parts of him that I think you would not need from any other documentary. So for me, Federer has always been that, and even when he was not at his best, rooting for him when he was coming in as the underdog against Nadal and Djokovic towards the end of his career, it was always about wanting a certain kind of tennis to still survive. The single-handed
yeah,
backhand, the cross-court forehand, the way he serves. It just it's very easy to put him in adjectives and sort of reduce him to that. He was perfection, but I think I always found in him the most human traits of playing a sport, and I think that's
yeah.
why. I mean, I can't believe it's been like almost 4 years since he's gone, but that's why I always feel like tennis for me has been him and will always be him.
Yeah, and like you said, that there's much going on behind what we see. The surprising fact is that Federer, in his early days, before he had won Wimbledon, was actually called Little Satan. He was extremely short-tempered. He'd smash rackets, everything that we have not seen him do since we became fans. And that actually changed for him after his first coach passed away in a car accident on his honeymoon, which Federer had recommended, and it affected him so much that he found focus, perhaps through his entire career, as a give back to this coach, basically. And he's since flown his coach's parents to every tournament he's been to, etc. So there's an entire parallel story for why he wanted to be great, why he wanted to be perfect after that day. So indeed, and I think for many of us, Federer also was the first person who we were growing up with. He's around the same age as us, and he was breaking so many myths and notions as we were growing, and we were trying to make sense of, okay, what does it mean to be 30? What does it mean to be 32? What does it mean to be 33? And here's a guy who goes and wins his 20th Grand Slam when he was 36 years old. And that just means so much more for you growing up at the same time, especially our generation of the 80s and 90s, which is, I think, a transitional generation where we are also trying to understand, we are also trying to make our own decisions, but also rebel in a sense against conditioning. I wanted to ask you if you think Federer represented a version of grace, beauty, and perfection that we fear is disappearing generally.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I think I sensed that very early in his career, and I think that also made me much closer to him. He became like, I think for a lot of fans like me, he became like the kind of best friend who represents something that's vintage and something that's also ne- that it's necessary for a certain kind of tennis to survive over the years. And you kept seeing players like him sort of diminishing and sort of fading out. The olden, the past eras, and basically the old guard, so to say, were being faded out by sort of a new modern style of tennis. So I think he always did represent that. In the beginning of his career, I think his style was just looked at as something magical and godlike. So it was very easy to slot him into brackets. But as we started seeing, I think, challengers come up like Nadal and Djokovic and Murray, and a lot of them who eventually used to beat him were represented a certain sort of evolving style of tennis. And the jury is always out on what kind of tennis you prefer watching, what kind of tennis you would have played maybe if you were an athlete. So I think for me it was never. I mean, as much as I loved watching their matches, I was never a fan of watching sort of someone bulldoze someone else off the court or someone just outlast someone. For me, Federer was still what sports was back in the 70s and 80s and 90s. So I think it was very important for me that he continued playing like that. And even when he started losing a lot and he started having problems with injuries, that made him a lot more human. And the fact that he used to still come and he changed his racket at one point, he had to reconstruct his game because of that, because he had took a
Yeah.
bigger racket. So for me, all of that contributed to my relationship with him as a fan also. Because seeing someone win all the time for 10 years or 15 years might have just been sort of, I don't know, it might have just been monotonous. And for me, that put a very complex sort of human aspect to him that we don't see in many of his interviews, we don't see in many of his post game, in the post game presentations. So I think a lot of that was, I think, the subtext of a fan, at least for me. Because, and as you said even earlier, I think growing up around the same age, you tend to look for someone you think um, represents you the best in whatever field, in as a personality, as a
Yeah.
writer, as anything, as a speaker. And I think Federer for me was someone I aspired to be in that sense,
Yeah.
even if it came at the cost of losing, came at the cost of sort of uh, being sidelined by, I don't know, AI for that matter. And AI for me
Yeah.
represents a certain kind of tennis.
Exactly.
So yeah, it always was about that, and I think very subconsciously, even I based my voice and my personality in my writing on someone like Federer, the way he played tennis.
Yeah, and even things like he got his 18th Grand Slam title 5 years after his previous one.
Yeah,
So you are winning like a machine, and then after 2012, you have to wait to 2017
yeah,
to get a title, and you are Federer, right? So you were at the top of your game, and then suddenly for 5 years, you've been around, you've been trying, and nothing happens. And in those days, I used to watch each of his Grand Slam tournaments, thinking that this may be the last time I'm watching him play. And that was quite,
yeah,
in a sense, a time where you feel like, are you kind of, trying to hold on to the dying light? And that went on for years and
yeah,
years. And who would have thought that he'd come back at the age of 35 and win Australian Open? And this was after the first time we had all, as fans, seen him go through surgery, his knee surgery. Um, and he even, towards the end of his career, showed us that even if it happens, like even if I had a perfect run and support from my body, the day it did not, I still found a way through it.
yeah,
And even though I was Federer, I had 5 years where nothing happened at the top of my career, and I still continued to believe.
yeah.
And I came back and I won three Grand Slams. And those are the kind of lessons that you go back to when you are pushed to a corner or you're making all kinds of effort, but things aren't moving in life.
Yeah. Yeah, sports tends to contain stories like these, no matter who the athlete. It could be and it's often, the best in the world who then struggling to hold on to their perch and sort of going through things we go through in everyday life, and suddenly they became more relatable. And Federer, for those 5 years, obviously we saw him reach a lot of finals. He was just struggling to sort of get over that last hurdle. And I think the surgery also uh, sort of compelled him to reinvent the way he played. Like
Yeah.
also go with, he changed his backhand. He started becoming
Yeah.
more aggressive, and something which fans always have very opinionated views of their favorite players, and they always think they know everything that is wrong with their game, not just everything that's right. And we always over the years was like, his backhand, he slices too much, he's not aggressive enough, and that's what they attack all the time. So, a surgery or like a such a change like that, and when you're already ranked like 17th in the world, suddenly you're Federer, you have no choice but to sort of change things up, and we underestimate how much these people love the game, and they cannot sort of envision a time where they weren't playing, and they don't know who they are if they aren't playing at their peak. So
Yeah.
I think that's what kept Federer going for the longest time, and that's what. And as fans, it became more interesting also then, because as like every tournament I used to go in, it's going to end this time,
Yeah.
and then after every tournament I was like, he's going to retire next week. So
Yeah.
we used to keep going through this cycle of sort of
Yeah.
hope and disappointment and just submission, um, and then when it finally came, it was so much more sweeter for me. 2017 Australian Open was one of the greatest sort of moments
Yes.
for me as a sports fan in my life. And when I'm say
Yes.
as a sports fan in my life, it automatically becomes in my life, because
Yes.
I don't think I've gone through those emotions
Yeah.
since. And before that,
Yeah.
also when he used to win a lot, it used to be like, okay, sure, he's won one difficult final again, but the narrative had become like, he's almost 36 and he's never going to win again. So for me, whatever he went through made number 18, 19, and 20 all the more sweeter.
Yeah, exactly. And I wanted to go back a little bit to, again, to your article about the documentary. And you've been very candid in that article, and you've spoken about the bond you have with Federer, and that your friend introduced
Yeah.
Federer into your life, and you were an Andy Roddick fan before that. So if you could elaborate that relationship, going through that, all of the Federer's glorious years, essentially, with
Yeah.
your best friend.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because it's hard to talk about Federer without sort of associating him with my friend, and obviously he's no longer with me now, but when I was in college, he was the first friend I made in Bombay. It was my first year in Bombay, and again, as I said, I was just by default supporting an American, saying, who's the next great guy after Pete Sampras? It's Roddick. Let me support him. He has a great serve. he's funny to watch. He's energetic. And then this new friend I made was like, why don't you look at this Swiss kid who's coming up, and maybe watch his final versus Philipp Husses. And we watched it together, and then that's when I realized that the game matters so much. It's not just about loyalties. It's not just about just blindly following someone because you used to follow someone else. So that's when I started understanding the game of tennis. That's when I started watching it with a forensic sort of eye. And we
Yeah.
used to discuss it so much amongst ourselves because we had never seen a game like Federer. We hadn't seen, we had been brought up in the 90s on like serve and volley. And,
Yeah.
we had, there were either clay court players or grass court players. Then, suddenly you see someone like Federer who's an all court player and he looks equally comfortable everywhere. And it was very, I instantly became a fan, and obviously it became a running joke between us that if not for him, I would have never known Federer, which is very true. And ironically, that's how it went. The ebbs and tides of his career also sort of, which I even wrote in the review, sort of went very well with our friendship because my friend moved abroad. Then we had a long distance friendship for the longest time. This was when Federer was also struggling to win again, and finally when Federer retired at the end, like in 2022 Laver Cup, we saw it coming. For 1 year, he hadn't played before it. He was injured, and it was always the messaging between us was always that. And my friend already sort of was in recovery from cancer then. And the moment Federer retired, and I tell myself this all the time, that's when he also relapsed, and that's when he passed away. And in as a sports fan, you often create narratives in your head, and
Yeah.
that as long as Federer's career was there, your friend was there, and your friendship was alive. And the moment he left, everything else ended. So for
Yeah.
me, that documentary sort of presented something very poignant, which I didn't see back then. Because at the end of 2022 is when sort of my life changed in many ways. You lose your best friend, you don't know who you are. You lose the one person you were following for the longest time in a sport, and you don't know if you want to follow tennis anymore. You don't know if you have the courage to do it. Uh, yeah, and that's why after that, even now when I watch someone like Djokovic still just only playing majors, I'm still very nostalgic because when I see Djokovic, I see who Federer was, and I
Yeah.
see the player that was there when Federer was there. So for me, it's also living through that big three era, which is, as you said, so-called. It's going and it's gone,
Yeah.
uh, and it's really nice to just see Djokovic sort of enter majors, reach semis and finals. And for me, that's also keeping Federer's memory alive in many ways, keeping Nadal's memory alive. So for a lot of Federer and Nadal fans who were really at odds with each other back in the day, and Twitter
Yeah.
used to be alive with all this trolling
Yeah.
and the banter and the fights. I think a lot of them will admit now that it's just it's just lovely to have anyone there. Honestly, like when I
Yeah.
was Nadal retired, I was crying just like that.
Same. Yeah.
It was the same thing, and it didn't matter,
Yeah.
whether he was Federer's rival. It didn't matter for me. It was a part of Federer, just as Federer was weeping when Nadal was next to him. So
Yeah.
I'm sure I'll react the same way when Djokovic goes because that is the true end of what
Yeah.
of a once in a lifetime or once in a century sort of era of tennis, which I don't think we're going to see again for a long time. Sure, we have two already right now, but I don't think we'll see a third protagonist also. It's
Yeah.
very rare. So,
Yeah.
yeah, Federer obviously, I think as much as I'd like to believe that I'm my own person and all, he represents a very big part of me. And I think I've been missing that part for the last 4 years. And sometimes I wonder, like if I'll ever feel like that again for any other athlete.
Yeah, I see that, and that's what makes our fandom so personal, and that is what takes us beyond the data and beyond the short analysis and everything else. Even for me, I started following tennis very early on because my father introduced me to it, and I used to sit and watch it with him. And later on, when I moved away from Pune, where I grew up, I had to hold on to home because it was the first time I was away from home. And so, what do? I started watching tennis by myself only after I moved away from home. And that was really the memory of being around at home and being able to call back and say that, hey, I watched the match, etc. And then later on, it became a weapon to make friends.
Yeah.
Because I was in a job where I was moving every 2 or 3 years, so everything would change. Your home would change, or I would move countries, or I'd move cities, and almost all my friendships, 80% of my friendships are bonds I have formed around sport,
Hmm.
either going and playing or sitting and watching tennis. And coincidentally, I made really good friends who would love to play and watch. So a lot of my early memories were about watching tennis with these friends and moving around the world with them, and then carrying that as part of home
Hmm.
everywhere.
Yeah,
And so that's why I said we grew up with it as a bit of a companion with us,
for sure.
and it's actually helped you move through life. Every time you thought that you did not have a anchor point,
Yeah.
you knew that the television screen and the Grand Slam is going to be the same, the story of the player is going to be the same, and invariably you'd find somebody who'd share that passion.
That's true. I mean, I can't think of a better way to put it because even my most of my college friends were all formed around tennis and football. And I remember the Federer-Nadal semi-final in 2005 Australian Open, which Federer lost, even though he was the favorite. That sort of helped me make a lifetime, like three or four friends I'd know for the rest of my life because we all watched it together
Exactly.
at a cafe because we bunked college to watch it because we were like we need to watch the match, and we became friends only because we shared a common passion at that point, which is to watch Federer win. So I think, yeah, that the way it's sort of influenced, and the highs and lows in his career sort of always synced with the highs and lows in my life, and the more you move past that and the more you move into the future, the more you realize that I think, as you said, it was an invisible companion, but I think probably one of the most important relationships in my life. And I
Absolutely.
know sports fandom is sometimes not understood by a lot of people who don't watch sports, which is fine, like to each their
Yeah.
own. But and I used to, for example, mock a lot of football fans, for example, because I never really got into it, but I know a lot of my college friends were Manchester United fans.
Yeah.
But then I realized it is a tool of friendship. It is a tool of
Yeah.
relationship. It's a tool to form your life around it or to hold on to bonds. And I think football did that for a lot of people, and I think Federer did it for me because tennis is a lonely sport. It's an individual sport. I think maybe not we don't have as much too much of a prospect to make those fans because we don't have fan clubs, so to
Yeah.
speak, like football does. But whenever those relationships used to form, they used to be really solid, and they used to be like you and I have something secret together, and we're always going to be those people.
Absolutely. And now all those friends I made back in Bangalore, which is where I was working at the time, are all in different countries. But when a match is going on,
Yeah,
you'd receive a message, and that message has no head or tail. It
yeah,
just is in the moment. I wish the next point
yeah,
is
exactly.
so and so,
Mm,
and you're just on the same page.
mm,
You know.
yeah,
So yeah, it continues something that started years ago and doesn't need any context because the context is just so strong.
yeah.
But moving forward, I also want to ask you, do you think that Federer would have been his greatest self even though he was gifted? And let's accept that
Hmm.
if it wasn't for Nadal.
No, no, definitely not. Like I mean, back then I used to curse my stars that Nadal suddenly came just when Federer was about to win the French, and he would have won like eight Frenches if not for him. And
Yeah.
like as a fan, I used to be really bitter, like most other fans, saying, Nadal is the devil. He shouldn't have been there. Federer would have won 30 slams. It's very like it's easy to be in the moment and all, but obviously in hindsight, if any fan is a purist and is honest with themselves, we know two rivals cannot exist without improving each other, without making each
Yeah.
other the best versions of themselves. And I
Yeah.
think Federer and Nadal kept saying it also all his life. The reason
Yeah.
Nadal also even won Wimbledon or won hardcourt titles was because Federer pushed him to be that player. And I think the same applied to Federer. I don't think he would have been pushed to make so many changes in his game, to sort of change his philosophy of playing, to change
Yeah.
coaches over time. If not for Nadal, he would have been really comfortable. In the pre-Nadal era, he
Yeah.
was beating everyone left, right, and center, and even without coaches, it didn't matter. So
Yeah.
I think that's when Federer also realized that, you know, it's always going to be a two-person. It's always going to be two people at the top. It's boring when it's one, and most sports tend to do that. Like
Yeah,
it's. But with tennis, we were lucky to see sort of Nadal come up at the same time, and nobody expected him to be an all-court player. Like neither did
yeah,
Federer, and I think,
yeah,
yeah, I think I'm glad that Nadal existed, and I'm glad that even because of him, Federer didn't win. But when he finally got the better of him towards the end of his career, it was really nice to see. It felt like the scales were balanced a little because he
yeah,
won like 5 out of 6 the
yeah,
last matches, and it was nice to see because it felt like Federer had finally cracked a code he couldn't crack, but it was too late. It didn't
yeah.
matter anymore because Djokovic was already at the top. So I like the poetry of it all. I like the tragedy and the triumph of it all, and I think if not for Nadal, I would not have loved Federer so much also.
Yeah, yeah. And I also think that Federer sort of realized that, uh, the greatest of the people also, know inside them, within their minds, what gift they have,
Yeah.
right? And so Federer probably knew that he had a gift as well. He's also said in his interviews that I hated training. I was a very bad training partner. I was a match player. Whatever happened, whatever improvement, whatever came into me was all on the court. So he was essentially somebody who performed against applause
Yeah.
and he had enough of it. But I think with Nadal, he realized that there can be a player who works so freaking hard that a gift can be overcome with just pure focus because Nadal represented that. Of course, he had his gifts as well, but Nadal represented blood and sweat.
Yeah, that's
You
uh,
know.
that's true, and it turned Federer into more of a fighter over time also, because he had, for the most part, he had matches on his racket all the time. He
Yeah.
dictated the rhythm of a game. He dictated play. But when things never used to go according to his plan, he used to pretty much fold. Like in three, he never used to like fight till the last point. Like we associate that with Nadal and Djokovic, and I think they made Federer think on those terms also.
Yeah.
That even if you're match point down, you shouldn't just like throw it away, or you shouldn't just look forward to the next tournament. And I saw that was a chink in Federer's armor when things never used to go. He was very good in the lead, but when he was behind, he was not really good at coming back. And I think that made him better. Like the philosophy of Nadal, who just they just never gave up. They worked so hard. All the cliches we thought about like Nadal and then Djokovic, I think that made Federer mentally tougher, which I
Yeah.
never associated. You have to be a default level of mentally tough to make it as an athlete and to be the best in the world. But then there is another level of mentally tough which you have to unlock in match play,
Yeah.
while trying to win more and trying to hold on to your top spot. And I think that other level is what rivals like Nadal helped Federer to maybe be a little better at that. I won't say he was the best. I don't think he scrapped a lot, but I think gave him another dimension.
Yeah, and I think Djokovic actually showed both of them
Yeah,
what it means to have mental toughness. Because now, look, here's a gifted player, he already exists. Here's a hardworking player, he already exists. Now you're the third challenger. Anyway, you're working against the crowd. Because, and I've read quite a bit about, Djokovic wanting love, which he never got. But he then weaponized people being against him. He weaponized playing against the crowd, and that actually over time made him mentally really tough. And so the weapon that Djokovic has actually had is not hard work only, it's his mental toughness,
yeah,
playing against the crowd. And that is why towards the end of matches in the fifth sets, when your body is failing you, when you're and with all these guys, you are so a point away from the match completely turning. With these guys, if you lost a point in the fifth set, the match would actually sway from right to
yeah.
left. It wasn't There was no breathing space. And I think Djokovic showed both of them that that could also be a weapon,
Yeah.
and that could also be a level that they have probably not thought of.
Yeah, I mean, some of the more depressing moments of my life have come because of Djokovic. It's not
Yeah.
Nadal, it's not anyone else. It's because of Djokovic. Like
He's
2019
beaten them
Wimbledon,
both more.
huh?
He's beaten them both
Yeah, yeah,
more.
he's beaten them both more, and just the way he's beaten Federer, like always match point down, always
Yeah.
when he gives you hope and takes it away, and you never expected that. And I don't think I've ever till my dying breath will get over the 2019
19,
Wimbledon
yeah.
final. Ever. Like
Yeah,
it's the kind of grief I felt without losing a person.
yeah,
You just lost
yeah,
a match and I went
yeah.
into a 2 month funk. Like people did not
Wow.
recognize me anymore. I just lost the ability to talk to people. I closed myself, I shut myself in. I was like the you know
How did this happen?
no match had ever affected me so much. No
Yeah,
defeat had ever affected me so much. And I think Djokovic, that's the thing he always held over everyone else, right from 2010, 2011, when he started winning matches solely because of his mental toughness or being down or being the antagonist in the for the crowds. I always used to joke that maybe if the crowds give him love, he'll lose. Like
yeah,
that's the only way to defeat him. Start cheering for him.
yeah,
And nobody ever cheered for him because they loved Nadal more and Federer more. It's not that they hated him. They
yeah.
just loved the others more because the others were more of soulmates to each other in terms of how opposite their games were. Djokovic was out of syllabus. Nobody expected him to win. So
And they
nobody
didn't make
knew how
sense
to.
of him.
Yeah, nobody made sense. Nobody knew how to receive him. So,
Yeah,
so it's not everyone's fault. It's just that he just did not get the love they did, and I think that, as you said, that made him a different kind of player. That made him channelize things differently, and of course, he destroyed both sets of fans in the process. And I always believe there was no such thing as a Djokovic fan right from the beginning. You became fans because you didn't like Nadal or Federer. So
yeah,
so yeah, I mean, again, that was a third. He started as a third wheel, but what that was the third dimension of the rivalry you needed so much because someone was working in the shadows for so long till both of them sort of faded and then won all his Grand Slams, which is saying something. Nobody expected him
yeah.
to do that.
And I fully believe that he continues to play today,
Yeah,
not because he wants to make that 25th Grand Slam, but because he's enjoying love now
yeah,
from people like
yes,
us who are watching him,
yeah,
who are holding on to our memories by a single
that
thread.
is true.
And he's feeling that on the court. It's a very different phase for Djokovic himself. And I fully believe that he's not playing right now for his 25th Grand
No,
Slam,
it's
even though he's
true. He's
committed.
he's on his retirement tour technically.
Yeah,
I think this is what like I also admired Andy Murray a lot, being the fourth
yeah,
person in the whole thing, and I admired him because he reached the top and then played as an amateur almost for the next 5 or 6
yeah,
years because
of
he was so
course.
injured, only for the love of the game, only
Yes.
because he enjoyed being a nobody, so to say, an underdog who could just
Yeah.
play tennis without expectations. And I think
Yeah.
Djokovic relatively is in that phase right now because the Alcaraz and Sinner are so high above everyone else that nobody expects anything from anyone else, and they've
Yeah.
taken tennis to another level. So because of that, whenever Djokovic enters a major, I think he can just play.
Yeah.
He doesn't need to be burdened by his own legacy. Nobody expects him to win number 25, even though he came very dreadfully close in the Australian Open. And I think that love he's receiving is probably why he's playing. That's true because, and I also believe that's also probably why he's not getting across the line in terms of winning
Yeah.
that last match because I think he's happy, he's satisfied with what he's achieved, and he's just treating this as the sort of pressure-free like retirement tour that he never would have got if Federer and Nadal would have still been around. And I think
Yeah.
now we are just holding on to him as a. It's not like when I watch Djokovic play Alcaraz in a final or Sinner in a final that I'm sort of rooting for Djokovic. It's not like that, but I just like watching him play now because I think he represents a lost part of ourselves also. Like I'm watching Djokovic now and saying, why am I not hating him?
Yeah.
And at the same time, I'm also missing the strong emotions I used to feel as a person when I used to see him on court when Federer was around. I
Yeah.
always used to feel so scared of a fifth set of a last game. So now it's just watching context free, which is nice, and I think he deserves that after everything that he's sort of gone through in the last 20 years.
But also through his life, right? He's the only one who's from Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
He's survived bombing. He's had to make this big decision of whether he'll become a citizen of UK or he'll continue to represent Serbia, which is quite the story. He doesn't fully get
It
credit
is.
for,
Hmm.
and that is quite the uphill climb that in some ways Nadal and Federer didn't have. Uh,
That's true. They were relatively more privileged. They came from well-to-do families, sporting families.
yeah,
They had all the support, and in any other sport, in any other era, maybe someone like Djokovic being coming up the way he did as an underdog from a war-torn country would have been the perfect narrative. He would have been the darling of the crowd for the next 20 years because he is the protagonist we always imagine when we watch
Yeah.
sports. We want inherently people like him to succeed. But can you imagine the aura of Federer and Nadal, who, despite coming from privileged backgrounds, still sort of owned the attention of the crowds the way they did, and also did not allow us to really get into the narrative of Djokovic as much as we might have in any other era, any other sport. If he were to come up now, we would have romanticized the hell out of his upbringing and where he's come from and how much he's had to struggle. But now it's too late, and and it's a good thing we saw him only play on ability, on potential, and there's no secret that his mental toughness came from somewhere. It can't have come
Yeah.
from nowhere. And it is the cliche, it is a cliche you see in movies that people who go through tough sort of childhoods always are mentally tougher than the others. But we
Yeah.
see it in sport more amplified. We saw that with Djokovic, but we were not ready to acknowledge it because he was ruining a narrative that was already there.
Yeah, indeed. And I wanted to also get a little bit into how your life in films
Hmm.
with this. And sports writers sometimes say that Federer was too clean, that Nadal's suffering made him more human.
Hmm.
Dripping sweat, you can see the power he is putting into a stroke, etc. So, first, do you buy that? And does the same critique apply to certain filmmakers whose work is too beautiful to be emotionally devastating? For example, Sanjay Leela Bansali.
Wow. Okay. I don't buy that about Federer. Over time, it wasn't a binary for me ever. I think the cleanliness, as so, whatever you want to call it, the purism, the cleanliness, I think it concealed a lot of layers between
Yeah.
them, and I think a lot of us liked watching um, that particular style because it could give way at any point. It wasn't dominated by physicality. He made
Yeah.
more mistakes than the other two, so
Yeah.
he was more human than the other two. Like there's one way to look at it also, because the others were just, it was pure grit and pure practice, and it was like machine like over time. So their mistakes reduced. They had a game plan. They knew their bodies. They knew what they had to do. With Federer, it was almost instinctive most of the time. He came up with plans in the middle of a point. You could see that sometimes. He played very impulsively, and I think he came up with solutions accordingly. And I think
Yeah.
that is more human than the other two, if I were to put a counter argument. So, yeah,
Hmm.
it is for the sake of sports writing, it is easy to categorize them into binaries like that, but I don't buy that with someone like Federer. If you watched him for 20, 25 years, I think he was more human than the other two in many ways, especially his
Hmm.
style of play. Like, sure,
Hmm.
he didn't fall as much, he didn't, but he cried after the match as more than
Yeah.
anyone else. He
Yeah.
showed more
Yeah.
emotions more than anyone else. And
Yeah.
all those emotions that were suppressed during the match, you could see in every point also. Like, you could see the
Yeah.
way he sort of, he almost walked dismissively most of the time because he was also afraid to confront his own fragility against the other two. So
Yeah.
I really like that about him. And as to, with parallels with filmmaking, I think there are many parallels like that. But I also believe that someone like a Bansali or someone who's grown up watching Bansali movies will also put counterpoints, say that, there is a certain kind of humanity to the very curated beauty he shows. Because that also says so much about the filmmaker and so much about the life they want to escape, or they make dreams out of. The more
Hmm.
beautiful their films are, the more uh, the more difficult reality is. So that's how you, even when I watch a Bansali film, I realize, and the more beautiful it is, or the more whatever perfectionist, and the more the frames are more painstakingly composed, the more I realize that there's something he's escaping from, there's something the film is escaping from, and the world
Hmm.
isn't great then.
Hmm.
If you have a filmmaker like Bansali around, you need that escapism, you need that fantasy, and I think they do that job for a lot of people who go to the movies to watch, to be consumed by every frame.
Yeah.
Sure, I would love to see, a little bit of realism here and there in terms of characters and whatnot, but I think every filmmaker, every storyteller comes with their own sort of priorities and strengths and weaknesses. I think you can accuse Christopher Nolan of being the same also. He
Yeah.
thinks on scale, he thinks conceptually. Maybe there's a bit of humanity and emotion missing sometimes. he's accused of
Yeah.
being too clinical and too technical sometimes. But
Yeah.
again, I find more like with Dunkirk, I found more humanity in that, in the what he was
Hmm.
trying to convey, than probably any other filmmaker. So
Yeah.
it lies in the eyes of the beholder, honestly. Like, I don't think you can reduce anyone to that.
Right. And I also wanted to ask you that your writing often finds cinema in sport
Hmm.
and vice versa.
Yeah.
Do you think sport gives people something that cinema can't? Or is it actually the same emotional need being served differently?
I think it's a bit of both, because sport is obviously the non-fiction version of cinema in many ways. Everything we see in cinema is what we've seen already in
Correct.
life. They are tropes of sport. They are tropes of life. That's why, like, it's always astounded me that people manage to make mediocre sports movies, because I was like, all you have to do is like reflect what life is. Why do you have to amplify something that's
Yeah.
already so big? But
Yeah.
yeah, I think sports serves also a different need in many ways. As I said earlier, I think it also breaks that sort of fourth wall between the viewer and the celebrity or the athlete, because it is, we know at the back of our mind that what we are watching is reality. It cannot be written most of the time. When it is so great, we call it scripted. It's
Yeah.
always like that. So I think fiction is always, when you're watching movies, you're always at the back of your mind know why you're watching it, because reality doesn't cut it for you anymore. But
Yeah.
with sports at its best, I think it does what no film can. I think it does what no fiction, no art can, because it is inherently, it becomes art. It becomes what art was created to do.
Yeah.
And I think you only find that most in its most, like, almost in its purest form sometimes in sport, in the narratives we look at. That's why I
Yeah.
love sports writing so much. That's why I love reading sports writers so much. I think it's the best kind of writing in this world,
Yeah.
and it's the best kind of journalism, because you get to locate narratives that are pre-scripted in movies, and you
Yeah.
get to do it in reality. And I think that's a great honor to do as a writer or a columnist or whatever it is. So I always wanted to write more about sports. It's just I've never. I mean, as much as, and whenever, I think some of the maximum gratification I get from writing is when I write something about my favorite tennis player or a match or cricket or something like that. It's never about the film. It's never about a review I've written. It's always about the next Djokovic piece, or maybe a piece on the IPL or something like that. It's always the sports, because you're writing about truth.
Yeah. And are we going to see you write more about it now?
I mean, I hope so. It's just that, because in your head you always have a day job, which
Yeah.
which always spills over into the night, because as a writer you tend to think through the night and through the day. It's not as easy as shutting your laptop at 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. You're always trying to crack a review. So
Yeah.
when I do have the bandwidth, I always try to write about sports, but I haven't done so in the last 6 months, more so because I've also lost a certain connection with sport in general in the last one or
Yeah.
2 years. It's not just because Federer retiring. I've lost my love for cricket in general.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't feel as passionately as I used to. With tennis, I'm still finding my feet with Alcaraz and Sinner. It's
Yeah.
because I don't technically root for either of them. It's too early,
Yeah.
and they represent a very different language of sport than Federer used to. So, because
Yeah.
I'm still finding my feet in this modern era of sport, I think I've lost a certain connection of sport that I had when I was in my 20s and 30s. And I think because of that, maybe I don't feel strongly enough to write about sport right now. Because I don't remember the last thing I'd written about sport. Maybe
Yeah.
it would have been about Mohammad Siraj winning a test or something like that. But you have to look for those isolated moments, and you have to feel strongly enough. So like, who knows? Maybe after the next Alcaraz Sinner final, which I still feel is peak sport for me right now. If
Yeah.
I watch it as a neutral, because I'm not supporting anyone, it's really
Yeah.
great to watch. But
Yeah.
yeah, something has to inspire you to write about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me as well, it's been the same.
Yeah,
But I'm really looking forward to the FIFA World Cup
same.
starting next month.
Yeah, yeah.
And after a very, very long time, I'm really, really waiting for a sports event. in that sense. I've been following tennis as well, but I haven't made up my mind.
Yeah,
And when I watch Alcaraz and Sinner, I'm not watching with emotion. I'm just watching because
exactly.
what can they do?
Yeah,
Like show me what you can do. Um,
right.
but I also wanted to go back a little bit to your first idol, which is Andy Roddick. Um, do you sort of see all that he's doing? He's quite vocal, and what do you feel about his career? Which, for me, I'd always be heartbroken for Roddick
Yeah,
for the 2009 Wimbledon
yeah.
final, where he was clearly the better
He
player.
was, he was.
It's the kind of moment where you just cannot explain what happened and why this player lost.
Yeah.
And I would always, for that one moment, remember Roddick so fondly.
I agree. Like, I mean, yeah, like I wouldn't go as far to say as that, he was he was my hero or anything, but I did enjoy watching him a lot in that decade. I mean, everyone thought it'd be Federer Roddick for the next 10 or 15 years, but then Nadal came too early. Like, he came in 2006 and 7, and Roddick was being phased out by then already.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
I actually enjoy watching a lot of Roddick now because he's a great podcaster, I feel.
yes,
I think he's really vocal about a lot of things uh, and he's very well spoken. As an American, he has opinions, but he also knows how to put them. And you will
yeah,
also respect them because he's gone through the ringer. He only won
yeah,
one Grand Slam after such a decorated career, thanks to
yeah,
Federer. And he always was in good humor about it. He was such a
yeah,
personality. And I think you
yeah,
need personalities like him. You needed a Safin, you needed a Roddick. And Roddick
yeah,
made a joke about how it was not really a rivalry because only one person was winning for so long back then.
yeah,
And yeah,
yeah,
I felt terrible for him in the 2009 final. And in my mind, when Federer lost the 2019 final, I thought this is technically payback for 2009 because he was not the better player there, but he was the better player in 2019, and he lost that. So tennis can be cruel, and I secretly was hoping Roddick would win that match, even though I was very much on board Federer winning his 15th. I felt like Roddick uh, sort of threw everything he had in 2009, everything he had possible. That's why he retired early. It took a
yeah,
toll on him.
yeah,
So yeah, I'm very fond of him, and a lot of the analysis and a lot of my way of keeping in touch with tennis right now is through Roddick and through the way he speaks and through the way he writes. Also, he gets some great guests on his podcast. He has writers on them. There's mutual respect, and I think that's how punditry should be done. Also, after
yeah.
your career.
And tennis has kind of lagged behind, I think, in that sense, in terms of two things. Giving back in the sense,
Yeah,
and expressing yourself, uh, also in terms of whatever's going on in the world, in terms of being a voice for reason,
yeah,
uh, but also then that sort of continuity, that sort of camaraderie, or whatever that Roddick is doing now in terms of analysis,
yeah,
comes from somebody who's passionate, who's been there, and who's sharing, which I think tennis has not been as forthcoming with.
yeah.
I think a lot of it is sort of moving on the women's side, because women are actually um, always in a position where you feel like you have to be vocal about something. Like, I have immense respect for Serena and Venus, who have not only platformed black players in tennis, but also asked for equal pay,
Yeah.
also gone on to now become VCs.
Yeah.
So an entirely different arc.
Mm.
And that makes it so much more interesting to follow Serena 2.0,
Mm. Yeah.
which I don't know if Nadal or Federer are going to have.
Yeah. As you said, I don't think there's like, unfortunately, men are never sort of bestowed with the burden of having to prove themselves all the time. Unlike women who somehow, even while they're playing and after they're playing, they always have to prove that, they sort of
Yeah,
deserve a certain kind of respect or a certain kind of view. I think because of that, as you said, I don't think we see a lot of uh, former players give back to the game or even sort of express themselves or make the game better. You see that in cricket as well. Um, but yeah, it's interesting you pointed out Serena and Venus because they were the superstars for me in the female game while growing up. And at least it coincided with Federer's sort of rise also. And I always had a love-hate relationship with I think Serena Williams over time. And over time, I also grew to respect her more than
Yeah.
probably anyone in the men's game because of everything that she represented and because of what she had to go through just to sort of be the champion that she was. So I think, yeah, I don't think we might see that from Federer and Nadal.
Yeah.
I think maybe they'll return as coaches or pundits or whatever it is, but they do run academies, they do sort of things on their own on the side, but I don't think it's in the way of platforming sort of a certain kind of tennis or certain kind of for the future or anything like that. It's anyone who can afford it will go there. It's one of those things.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, it is. I mean, it's always going to be like that, and I think Roddick is a little more vocal about that. I think it also comes from being American in general and not being European.
Yeah, maybe.
I
Yeah.
think he's seen the America around him grow and evolve and devolve into the America it is, so he has more opinions. So yeah, so I'm glad that he's around, and and it will help maybe future generation of tennis fans to connect with players.
Yeah, indeed. And after talking about everything that sport has given us, not just tennis, but just as sports fans, something that a question that I ask myself all the time, I also wanted to ask you, do you ever point the essence of all this admiration towards yourself sometimes and wonder what impact will I leave behind?
Mm, I mean, I don't know about that. Like, it's been such a personal relationship that we barely talk about. It only comes out in spurts and expressions most of the time. That I've always tried to preserve it in a very
Hmm.
private sense. That
Hmm.
it's. I don't really think like the fandom that I think some of us represented a decade ago when Federer was there, or 2 decades ago when he was rising. Uh, I think fandom changes its language every decade. With social
Yeah.
media now, it's very different than what it was maybe 20 years ago or 15 years ago for that matter. So I think I don't think about like the kind of essence that way, but I also do in a very sort of nostalgic way long for how it used to be to have uh, someone who is beyond your reach and someone who's a stranger, and still you give more importance to that person than probably anyone else around you, and how much of
Yeah.
yourself you put into that person. So I don't think that's possible now with how accessible everyone is and how every sport has become so sort of democratized by social media and the internet. So I think that language of sport, I don't think we're going to see again. And because of that, I think that language of fandom, like us growing up the way we did, we are not going to see again. So I don't think there's anything to leave behind, but I'm very curious as to uh, how things will be going forward because,
Yeah.
there
And that was my next question. Where do we go from here?
I mean, your guess is as good as mine. I cannot even predict how it will be next week these days. But with sport in general, with fandom, it tends to get toxic all the time. It tends to get a really, I don't know. There's a lot of agenda in everything that
Yeah.
happens these days, whether film or sport, and fans are the first to fall in line in that sense because
Yeah.
now it's more systematic. It's come down to trolling and fan clubs and whatnot. So I think because of that, I think the innocence of being a fan is not going to be the same.
Yeah.
It's always going to come with a lot of opinions or reactionary opinions saying, I'm better than them. I'm not a troll online.
Yeah.
I have my own relationship with sport. But even that is a reaction. So for us, it never
Yeah.
used to be a reaction. It just used to be as much as I used to just want to stay awake to watch Federer. And no other
Yeah.
athlete will do that. And why? Because I miss sort of feeling that elevated heartbeat that I felt while watching
Yeah.
his matches. And it's never
Yeah.
going to probably happen again, and that's unfortunate. But I don't think fandom is going to be like that again in general. Like for
Yeah.
football, it
And the
probably is.
commerce.
Hmm.
And even look at the commerce. Like there are people really complaining about the FIFA World Cup
Hmm.
now, which is coming up, and saying that the tickets are just so expensive.
Yeah. I noticed.
I mean, if you're going to now say, and it's the same complaint I have about movies today,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like, let's say a Durandar,
Hmm.
the ticket prices are such that you're being told at the ticket window itself that we don't think you can come here and enjoy this spectacle.
Yeah, and if you afford it, you better like it because you paid so much to watch it.
Yeah,
It's become like that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's
But I and so I have this last closing question. for you, which is that, is there a film that has given you what Federer gave you? Like, not just aesthetically, but the specific feeling of being completely surrendered to someone else's genius in real time.
Um, I don't know if there's been one film, but like for me, it's. I think I felt like that when Federer was playing. I think while growing up, also like Christopher Nolan, a lot of his movies were releasing when I was growing up. I think when I watched Inception, which was
Yeah,
2012 or something, or 2010 actually, that was I think the maximum I felt while watching a film, just to know what is possible
yeah,
in storytelling.
yeah,
Not that there's a lot of emotion in the film. It's just you're expanding the grammar of filmmaking and storytelling on that scale to a level that has never been seen before. You're making a complex, probably one of the most complex scripts ever written, accessible to every person, and then start a discourse before social media was a thing. So for
yeah,
me, watching that film many times gave me probably the closest I felt while watching a Federer final, a Grand Slam final, because and it also went hand in hand. You know, I had Federer, I had also like a Inception on the side or a Interstellar releasing a couple of years. So it was always that film that changed the way I looked at storytelling and what is possible. Just like Federer
yeah,
changed the way I looked at tennis and what could be accomplished on a court. So I
yeah,
think for me, both went hand in hand, and maybe that's why I started Dunkirk review like that, because it's just both filmmaker and athlete went hand in hand for me for the longest time, and they expanded my horizons. So as a
yeah,
person, they changed who I was, and they changed my relationship with art and with sport. And I think you know I can never, yeah, I probably can't be more thankful to them because I write the way I do because of them. I am the person because of a lot of because of following them over the years. So I think they influence us in ways that are intangible, and I think Inception is that one film that has left its lasting impact on who I've become and also how much I miss Federer for some reason.
yeah. And I can't think of a better way to close this conversation than with those thoughts from you. Thank you, Rahul, for joining me today. And thank you to our listeners. I'll see you on the Curious Human Project next time.